Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve and it's time to take a look at my first draft for the 24-25 season, where we'll go through the spots in my team that are most likely nailed, those spots that are still up for contention, my short list of assets for any of these spots that are up for contention, and any relevant fixture notes from the preseason games that have been played already. Now, I've got a little bit to get through in this video, so before we jump into it, remember to give this a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, especially if you get any value out of the following content. Right, so the structure that I am going to be going with is almost certainly going to be a 3-5-2, and I've got both Haaland and Salah in my squad, and that is pretty much just because the Ipswich game for Liverpool in game week 1 and the Ipswich game for Man City in game week 2. Now, these two players are most likely going to be in my squad for game week 1. I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with both big hitters. Now, I do need to see some Man City and Liverpool minutes in the next 3 weeks to make sure that they are still the assets that they were last year, particularly Salah under Arnie Slot. We'll go through a little bit of Liverpool notes when we get to that. But in order to accommodate both Haaland and Salah, we've gone for a pretty light defensive line, where I'm currently sitting with 6.0 million spot. I'm actually running with 4.5 million defenders who will be rotating, and I've got a 4 million if I need to pull someone in off the bench for a random fixture type player sitting on the bench. So basically all my money is going into the players on the pitch, which is something that I did last year and which worked very well. But what it does require that to do as the season progresses is, if you get struck with injuries, you do basically have to act to those injuries as and when they occur. But I do think there are some advantages as well as some disadvantages to doing that. But that is not something that we will cover here. It'll be something that we go through in a strategy session a little bit closer to the game kicking off. Now, it also means that I have a dead striker spot. So I do have a 4.5 million Fraser from Wolves in there at the moment. Most of the defensive spots are still all up for grabs. We'll go through that in a little bit. But the idea of this team is to basically chase the captaincy. I'm a little unsure what I'm going to do in game week 3. There are a couple of plans that I have in mind. I would probably happily captain Haaland against West Ham away if I'm still running with the same squad in game week 3. But I am very much building this squad at the start to captain Salah game week 1, captain Haaland game week 2, and potentially make some transfers in game week 3. Now, this team currently has no Arsenal or Chelsea in the squad yet, but they are tentatively planned to come in as part of my first set of changes or transfers in either game week 3 or potentially game week 4. But just a note on Arsenal, they put out a youth squad against Bournemouth, where Bournemouth were basically playing their top team in the first preseason game. And Arsenal's youth squad actually, well, apparently dominated Bournemouth throughout that fixture, which it definitely goes to show the strength of depth that Arsenal has and how strong of an academy that they have set up. And so I am just putting this forward at the moment because we could have another Palmer situation on our hands if say any of these players from the Arsenal squad who are not likely to make it into the first team at Arsenal, if any of them get sold to a different Premier League club and starting for that club, then we could have potentially some very underpriced assets ahead of us. So, in the list of most likely nailed players, Haaland and Salah do top the list, obviously pending actually watching some football of them at the start of the season. Foden is in my squad here, expensive 9.5 million midfielder, also quite expensive considering I also have Haaland and Salah in the squad eating up quite a lot of my funds. But assuming that Foden is still playing in the same role and getting as many minutes as he was last season, he is most likely going to be nailed in my squad from game week 1. And then we have Anthony Gordon and Eze in here at the moment. Now, I haven't seen either of these two players play yet either, but these two are probably going to be nailed game week 1, purely based on the performances that they put in last year. I do need to see Palace in some preseason fixtures, but I do love Eze as a player. He's always on the ball, getting quite far forward on penalties, and without Elise in the team, it will detriment Crystal Palace a little. We will have to see who they do go and replace him with, and see how much of an effect that actually has on the Crystal Palace team. But he is probably going to probably going to be in my squad game week 1. I also need to see Newcastle as well, but with the changes to the BPS system, Gordon could potentially be earning more BPS by earning he'll actually be getting awarded bonus points for earning fouls, and Gordon is quite heavily fouled within that team. I know, is it Bruno Guimaraes or Joelinton, one of the two, also do pick up quite a lot of fouls in the middle of the park, but Gordon does also kind of get brought down quite often, and so should do relatively well on the bonus point system this season. Now, these two players are likely nailed. However, the changes at Liverpool with Arne Slot in charge could have me considering Diogo Jota as a 7.5 million player, currently listed in midfield. We'll discuss Jota in a little bit in the section where I go through my short list of players. So those are about the only mostly nailed spots in my team. And so what we'll go through now is the spots that are currently up for grabs. And we'll start off with my second striker spot, which currently has João Pedro in the team. Now, you will see on screen that this team does have a team value of 100 million. There is no money left in the bank. And I am aware that João Pedro may potentially be injured at the moment. Haven't seen him play either. We will definitely need to see him pick up some preseason minutes to have him in my squad. But assuming that he does start and is playing for game week 1, I'm almost certain I will probably start with him too, because he is a great enabler, gets well far forward, and is on penalties in that Brighton squad. Now, the only other player that I am currently have down on my shortlist for the second striker spot is probably Chris Wood from Nottingham Forest. However, he is slightly more expensive. He is 6.0 million forward. Now, we're not sure if he's on penalties or not. Morgan Gibbs-White might actually have the penalties. It's a little bit hard to tell who's got penalties at Forest, because I don't think Wood and Morgan Gibbs-White have been on the pitch at the same time when a penalty has been awarded. But if we do find out that João Pedro is not going to be ready for game week 1, then I will look to switch him for Chris Wood, meaning I will need to find 0.5 million somewhere in this squad in order to upgrade João Pedro. I don't really have any other players on my shortlist for the second striker spot. Now, I'm aware that Armstrong is floating around in a few teams out there. However, I do not fancy having to play him week on week, as the structure that I've set up here would mean that I would be playing João Pedro or Chris Wood every game while they are in the team. So next on the list is my 6.5 million spot in midfield, which currently has Szoboszlai in there. Now, he is currently playing Cam, or almost as a second striker, alongside Elliott in the first match for Liverpool this season, where Elliott was actually playing in a false 9. Now, I caught a little bit of Szoboszlai in the Euros playing for Hungary, and he was actually playing a lot further forward for Hungary and looked like a bit of an untapped weapon in that position. So I made a note to see what Arne Slot was going to do with him, as Jurgen Klopp had only really been playing him deep in the midfield, mostly in the right mid position, sometimes in centre mid or left mid, but he didn't seem to get as far forward under Klopp as what he will do if he continues playing this cam role under Arne Slot. Now, Slot has mentioned that I think he was looking at potentially playing Elliott or Szoboszlai in the cam position, and the reason that they were playing that current formation is they didn't actually have any of their first team strikers available, and so they had to play it with false 9. So Arne Slot probably isn't going to roll into the season playing a false 9, but I suspect he's probably set up the team in such a way that he is testing people out in their preferred positions, and putting both Elliott and Szoboszlai on the pitch was a bit of a test to see who was doing well in that cam role. Now, as I mentioned, in that first game against Real Betis, he was playing as the second striker alongside Elliott, both with and without possession. Now, this was a false 9 system, so he and Elliott were dropping in and out of the central midfield spot, or probably closer to the cam role. And when they were coming out of that false 9 sort of position, dropping into midfield, both Salah and I think it was Carvalho on the other side were then darting in off the wings to make them become the 2 strikers up front. Now, Jota wasn't actually in the squad, but I am now very intrigued in him as an asset, given the new system that Arne Slot seems to be running with. I could see Arne Slot putting Jota up front, not as a false 9, but actually playing as a striker, and if so, 7.5 million at the pointy end of that Liverpool attack could be an absolute steal in that Liverpool squad. Now, of course, if Elliott is going to continue playing that false 9 position up front as well, he could also enter the fray, but I suspect he was only up there due to the personnel that was available to Arne Slot in that first game for Liverpool in pre-season. So at the moment I do have Szoboszlai in. Now my short list of other players in the 6.5 million price point is Elliott. Obviously we will need to see if he continues to play that role, and also I would like to check in on what his finishing is like. Gibbs White is also in the fray because the Nottingham Forest fixtures at the start of the season are very, very good. He is on penalties, very industrious player, hard-working. He's a bit of an engine in the team, but he isn't always as far forward, and so he's a bit more of a hope to get lucky type player simply because the run of fixtures is so good. And the only other player in my 6.5 million shortlist is actually Amad Diallo from United. Now, the notes from my final game week of last season was that United had started to string some football together with the youngsters playing on the pitch, and actually tagged Amad Diallo as having some pretty good performances. Now, in United's first game of the season, he did score a goal, and from what I've been told, was playing pretty well. Of course, that was just the first couple of preseason games. There are a lot of youngsters, I think, in the squad, and so pretty hard to tell exactly whether or not he has nailed that spot down or not. Now, I have watched the United Arsenal fixture that was on today, and the teams have changed quite a lot, but Diallo is still in my shortlist after that fixture. Now, out of contention for the 6.5 million spot, this is the short list of players that I have put right down the bottom of my list. Does not mean that I will not put them into my squad for game week 1, but it does mean that they will have to do quite a lot in order to be considered for that spot for game week 1. The top of that list is Garnacho, and that is only if his finishing has improved and that he is still going to be getting as many minutes as he was last season. So Garnacho currently out of contention for me. Madueke at Chelsea. Short note here that he was not chasing the ball down when he lost it in his first game in pre-season, which is a little bit worrying considering he should be trying to impress the new manager Enzo Maresca and earn his spot in the team. So Madueke, he seemed to be a little bit lazy in the fixtures that I saw him in last season, and early signs are that that hasn't changed at the beginning of this season, and so he is currently at the bottom of my shortlist. Now, Bailey from Aston Villa, his first two fixtures are pretty bad, but he is a dynamic player, gets amongst the attack. He is decent on the ball, but we do need to question what his minutes will be like. And so he is more one to watch to see if he has actually played his way into a starting spot in the Aston Villa team and will get a consistent run of minutes. Kudos is currently also out of contention for my team, as he has just got terrible fixtures. Great player. I will almost certainly bring him into my squad at some point during the season, but when the fixtures turn and when I have actually seen West Ham play a little bit of football. Grealish is also very low down on my 6.5 million shortlist. From what I've told, he had an okay performance in the first fixture, but he barely attacked, was consistently passing the ball backwards, and instead of running at his man, was often running parallel to goal, often like right along the halfway line. So he's got no direction towards goal, which is not really what you want. Grealish is great at holding the ball up, but he needs to be a bit more creative and be getting some shots off to have any sort of chance of earning his way into the squad. Now, second to last on my list of 6.5 million options is Brennan Johnson at Spurs, who had a pretty poor first performance in pre-season and also has a pretty tough run of fixtures. He would need to do a lot to earn his way into a starting spot in my game week 1 squad. And then last on my 6.5 million list is Nkunku at Chelsea. And I have managed to pull together some match notes from the Chelsea versus Wrexham game. There was some footage from the stands, and I've had to go through a little bit of forums to try and hunt this stuff out. But we had Enzo Maresca, which is the new manager in charge of Chelsea, with his first run out. Now, he has worked closely with Pep at City, and so could be looking to play a similar style of football, which would be awesome if we get another Pep-like team in the Premier League. Now, Maresca has said that he likes to work with the youth because they are more receptive to buying into his ideas, which also reads to me that he doesn't like the older players in the squad challenging him on his ideas, which will be interesting to see how the dressing room goes at Chelsea if he starts to get a little bit of pushback from the more experienced players in the squad. And as such, he did actually line up with no one older than 26 years old in the starting lineup against Maresca. But as it was a preseason game, he did put out two completely different teams. It was full of youngsters, and this was mostly because of the first team players were still returning to the squad from the various competitions that they are coming back from. Now, the little notes that I did find on Nkunku seem to resonate with the little that I did see of him last year. Now, we got Nkunku has a free header. It glances off the side of his head rather than putting his forehead through it. That was in the penalty box. Nkunku scores a goal, but it was a goal mouth scramble from a corner, so it wasn't really any sort of special bit of skill or anything. It's just right place, right time, and he's blasted the ball home from close range. Nkunku couldn't get the shot off from a great position in the 18-yard box. And Nkunku with a few heavy touches. Is that just rustiness, or is that just the type of player he is? So these are all very much putting him at the bottom of my list. Obviously, we will need to see him play some proper minutes in pre-season when there is actually a proper Chelsea first team starting to form around him, because it is quite hard to tell how players may be playing when they are around a whole bunch of youth players. However, there are reports that the second half Chelsea team that got put out onto the pitch got destroyed by a Wrexham team that had already played a full half of football. Now, that second half Chelsea team did concede 2 goals until they actually pinched one back in the 82nd minute, and that's when Wrexham had really started to tire in their pre-season fixture. Now, Wrexham didn't make many subs at half-time. It was mostly the team that started the first half, and so a fresh and fit second half Chelsea team struggled against a Wrexham team that had already played 45 minutes against the team that was put out in the first half in that Chelsea fixture. So maybe a little bit contentious there, as I do know Nkunku is making it his way into a lot of drafts out there, but he is nowhere near my team 3 weeks out from the start of the season. So next on my list of spots up for grabs is the 6 million defender spot. Now, I currently have Andy Robertson in here, who has not played a minute of pre-season football yet. He is simply in there because the Liverpool fixtures at the start of the campaign are beautiful for Liverpool. Ipswich away, Brentford at home, United away, Forest at home, Bournemouth at home, Wolves away, before it starts to get a bit more tricky with Palace away, Chelsea at home, and then Arsenal away. that is a serious run of fixtures from both defensive and attacking prospects. And so if Robertson is going to be starting for Arnie's slot, he could be a steal at 6 million, as other players with potential attacking upside elsewhere in the game, I think, have typically been priced about 0.5 million more expensive than centre backs in the various teams. In Liverpool, I think Virgil van Dijk is down at 6 million, and so we would have expected Robertson to be up around 6.5, but he has discounted at 6 million and could be an underpriced asset heading into the 24-25 season. Now, will he get the minutes under slot? Are Liverpool playing with win-backs at all, or have they got a different system running? Is Slot going to continue playing with a false 9, or was that only due to the personnel available? And if he's not playing with a first 9, then how does the system shift around on the rest of the pitch? So there's a lot of questions up in the air for Robertson, but who I would like to tag in here is Bradley, who did get his run out in front of Trent Alexander-Arnold and apparently played pretty well. He was moved into midfield and they went to a back 3, so it wasn't really a CDM role. I think he was more the right mid of a midfield 3 type system, and so I mean, if he starts getting starts in that Liverpool team, 5 million would be an absolute steal for Bradley, as he does or should still be getting quite far forward. But of course, we do need to check out what the Liverpool system will be like. Now, Saliba and Gabriel are obvious contenders for the 6 million spot. Arsenal's youth apparently looked quite amazing, but what will their first team look like? Jurrien Timber is also back in the fray, as he was injured for most of last season, and so we do need to see what kind of impact Timber has on Saliba and Gabriel's minutes, and so it's a little bit hard to tell who is the best choice out of those two. And of course, Gvardiol at Man City is an obvious contender for the 6 million spot as well, but we haven't seen much of Man City or the Man City first team so far in pre-season. Now, this defensive spot will most likely be the last spot to be filled within my squad. And there are a couple of options. If I still do have the funds to stick with a 6 million price tag, I may put in one of these 6 million assets, or I might drop down to a 5.5 million defender and then upgrade one of my 4.5 million defenders up to a 5 million defender. Or if I cannot start with João Pedro in game week 1 and I do have to upgrade to someone like Chris Wood, then I might ditch the 6 million spot altogether and just chuck in a 5.5 million defender in order to accommodate that for the first few game weeks of the season. Now, my 4.5 million defenders, none of them are nailed. The short list is actually probably a pretty long list, as there's a lot of options at 4.5 million. We haven't really had a chance to look at anyone too seriously yet. But the idea behind this team is to be rotating the last 2 defenders. I may be using Harwood Bellis at points, although I'd be trying not to use him. And Murillo is currently in here, as Forest's fixtures at the start of the season are exceptional. And they also, for the last 5 game weeks of last season, were coming 4th for expected goals conceded. So Man City first with 4.75 goals in the last 5 game weeks. Arsenal with 6.75. Brentford with 7.5, and Nottingham Forest with 7.75. That is pretty good going. They have also bought a new goalkeeper, I see, who's quite tall. And they're also looking to bring in a centre-back who's also very tall to try and deal with the set pieces, from which they did seem to be conceding a lot of And so we will need to see how these players slot in, but it does look like Forest might be an underpriced team based on how their stats were progressing at the tail end of last season. Now I've got Konza in here at the moment as well. Their first two fixtures are a little bit tough from a defensive standpoint, away to West Ham and then at home to Arsenal. Just order this by gameweeks. But then after that, it's a sea of green for Aston Villa. Away to Leicester, home to Everton, home to Wolves, away to Ipswich, potentially tough game at home to Man United, away to Fulham, and then at home to Bournemouth. That looks like a pretty sick run of fixtures for Aston Villa. So he is in there as a 4.5 million enabler for the expensive front line. And Dan Burn, who looks to be slightly underpriced compared to Fabian Schär, standing next to him at 5.5 million. Potentially they are predicting some reduced minutes for Burn maybe this season, but if he is starting in that Newcastle squad, he could be an absolute steal at 4.5 million. And the Newcastle fixtures at the start of the season are also pretty good. Southampton at home, game week 1, Bournemouth away, game week 2. Okay, tough game at home to Tottenham in game week 3, but then Wolves away, Fulham away before having to play Man City in game week 6. Potentially we could steal some clean sheets there. I mean, 3 of these great games are all away from home though, Bournemouth, Wolves and Fulham. We would have liked to see one of them potentially be a home fixture, but I mean, Newcastle are a pretty good defensive team. They weren't amazing last year, but they were missing Joe Ellington in midfield for large parts of the season, and he makes a huge difference, stopping a lot of ball getting through to the defence, which was actually quite obvious in the Newcastle squad last year. They were just getting run through midfield far too easily, and the defence was constantly being put under more pressure than what was needed. So that's pretty much the squad. We've got a dead 4.0 million keeper on the bench. This could be literally anyone. It's probably going to be someone that isn't too highly owned. I mean, Turner's owned by 24.6% of the game right now. It's unlikely I will start with him unless he's got any chance of actually playing some minutes. The reason for that is he could drop in value as players realise that he's not actually a first teamer and sell him early on. Fraser, I'm just going to go with a dead 4.5 million striker spot, very low owned from a team with potentially bad fixtures and who will also not block a spot for the rest of my team. So Fraser kind of fits the bill there. He did actually get some minutes last season, but I very much doubt that will happen again this season, but we will see. And so that's pretty much the squad. I've got a couple of future transfers that are tentatively planned in, and that will be Palmer, who is, I think, severely underpriced this season. He will almost certainly be coming into my squad either game week 3 or game week 4, probably as part of a 3-way switch where I might also bring Saka in at the same time. Now, in order to do this, I will have to sell Haaland or Salah in order to acquire the funds to do so. But as soon as those Ipswich games are out of the way, I am not adverse to selling one of these two players, as I do plan to do a bit of upside chasing in the early game weeks of the season and try to jump on the best captains week to week and focus my transfers on that in order to chase the upside. Now, having someone like Haaland on the squad, assuming he is the player that I do actually sell in order to be able to afford Palmer and Saka coming into this team, does mean that I will probably need 3 transfers in order to make that move effectively. Now, if I try to do it with just 2 moves, I will be left with quite a lot of money sitting in the bank for at least one game week, which is not really the way I like to play the game. I like to have as much money on the pitch or invested on the pitch as possible. And so I may either roll until game week 4, build up 3 free transfers and do all 3 transfers at the same time for free, or there might be a bit of a discussion around taking a hit in game week 3 to do the 3 transfers that I am looking to do, instead of waiting to game week 4 and making that move for free. Now, of course, we will have to see how the early season is going before we make those decisions, but those are some of the ideas on the cards. And the most likely moves would be Haaland being brought down to Isaac, which is actually like a 6.5 million pound drop in price. You don't want 6.5 million sitting in the bank for a week or more. So I'll be looking to upgrade potentially Szoboszlai to Saka, and one of Gordon and or Eze and or Jota all the way up to Palmer. And alright, well that wraps up this video. And don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a comment to tell us what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again next time.